It's an honor to be here. Thank you all. It's my great privilege to tell a Navy story about a POW, Navy POW, a favorite son from South Alabama. Maybe some of you have heard of him. He was born July 15th, 1924 in Mobile to an ordinary Mobile family. His name was Jeremiah Denton. Went to McGill, went to Spring Hill during World War II, and they wound up transferring to the United States Naval Academy, and he graduated an accelerated 3-year class in 1947 and went on to a illustrious 34-year career in the United States Navy. By the time of the Vietnam War, he had become he had been a test pilot and a bunch of different other things, but he had become an A6A intruder pilot, and he was a commanding officer of an A6A intruder squadron in Vietnam. He'd been there and started flying combat missions in 1965. Had been flying a little over a month when in July of 1965, he was shot down over Vietnam. He and his navigator and bombardier were able to eject, Lieutenant Bill Schutte, and they were able to eject and land with some injuries, but they were captured. And Jeremiah Denton wound up spending over 7 years in captivity with the North Vietnamese. And he wrote a book about it, about when Hell is in Session. It's been turned into a movie. He talks about and explains the unspeakable treatment and torture that they had done to those captured, to our POWs, to our service members that they had there. He was there for over 7 years. You may have heard the stories that he was part of a group that was actually a little bit too rebellious. They were leaders, and they kept all the prisoners too rebellious, so he and another group, James Stockdale and some other famous people you may have heard of, were removed, and he was in solitary confinement for over 3 years in a little cell that was 3 feet by 9 feet for over 3 years. He's probably most famous because during that time he'd been shot down in 1965, and then 1966, been almost a year in confinement. The North Vietnamese were trying to have a little public relations coup by doing televised interviews with the prisoners to get them to say things against the United States and that they were sorry they were there and things like that. And they brought him in and they tried to get him to denounce the United States, to say he regrets bombing the North. And he wouldn't say those. He said, I don't know what's going on right now, but I support my country, and I will always support my country until the day I died. And it seemed to the North Vietnamese anyway, it seemed like an uneventful, unsuccessful interview that they allowed to be broadcast. But unknown to the North Vietnamese, and a lot of the people just watching, and you got to imagine the wherewithal of a man who's been in prison, who's been tortured for a year now, and he had the wherewithal. He was weak, he'd been tortured, and during the entire interview, U.S. Naval Intelligence picked up that he kept blinking his eyes. And during that interview, he kept blinking his eyes in Morse code, which young people have no idea what Morse code is. But in Morse code, he kept blinking his eyes, the words to spell torture. T-O-R-T-U-R-E. Think about that. His captors were tormenting him. He had the threat of more torture after that. And while they interviewed him and he gave those answers, he repeatedly, with his eyes, kept blinking the words torture in Morse code. And thankfully, Naval Intelligence picked it up, and it confirmed for the United States government that our troops were being mistreated by the North Vietnamese. Well, finally, they were released at the end of the war, and Jeremiah Denton came back and finished out a great Navy career. He wound up being promoted to admiral, retired after 34 years, came back to Alabama, and you may remember that he was elected to be a United States Senator from the state of Alabama in 1980, and that actually he had two firsts with that, and that he was the first Republican elected to this, as a U.S. Senator from the state of Alabama since Reconstruction, the first one. He also was the first Catholic to be elected to a statewide office in the state of Alabama. He had a good career in the Senate, but he really wasn't a politician. His heart was really with his country, and he did charitable things all the way up to the end of it, through the end of his life. A lot of people don't even know he had a huge charitable foundation called the National Forum Foundation, where he coordinated globally getting free transportation for charitable goods. So if you had things to donate charitable goods, whether it was blankets or water or food or whatever, he coordinated getting free transportation to get it delivered around the globe. He also had another organization a lot of people don't know about because he felt very strongly about that. It was called One Nation Under God. Because he knew that this nation would not last if it didn't remain one nation under God. And I want to just close out to really sum up the greatness and humility. And that's where you really see the greatness of a great man, is in their humility. And what I want to close out is after 7+ years of imprisonment and torture, malnutrition, he's finally released, and he gets back on American soil, and the press gets in his face, and they ask him, well, what do you have to say after having been? And these are his words. We are honored to have had the opportunity to serve our country under difficult circumstances. We are profoundly grateful to our Commander-in-Chief and to our nation for this day. God bless America.